Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. It's been a while since we had a book review on the other book club. Just going through my library today, and I picked up this very wonderful and concise treasury of legal maxims that I've had on my shelf for many, many years, and I benefited a great deal from. I wanted to do a quick review for the benefit of the other book club, and also to recommend this book very, very highly. As in recent weeks, several principles of fiqh and the evolution of fiqh in the Sunni school have been challenged. As I've put out a few videos on revolutions, it's been it's an interesting journey many people are going on, but it's the lack of understanding of the historical development of fiqh in the Sunni school has caused many people to actually be confused. So I want to recommend for those who really want higher learning, a really wonderful and concise book that will give you a solid grounding in the historical and also in the methodological development of the Sunni school. Now, I've got my children with me today, so there'll be a bit of background noise. If you can pardon that and overlook that, the rest of the video will be quite interesting. So this book, Al-Qawa'id al-Fiqhiyya, are the principles of jurisprudence. The literal translation is the principles, al-Qawa'id, or the foundations of fiqh or the jurisprudence. But the translation here given is a treasury of sacred maxims, and it is quite befitting because it is literally a treasury of sacred maxims. And if you understand these very basic principles, it gives a very solid and a very rich and profound, deep understanding of some of the rulings that later on are developed by the Sunni school, by the Sunni scholars, to deal with power, for example, legislation, governance, and very, very interesting discussions in the history of Islam. So it's really a wonderful and very concise. It's not a very big compendium of laws and maxims. It's very concise, very elegantly packaged, beautiful. I really loved it. I still love it for the content and also the presentation of it. And we're going to look here. So it's by Shahr al-Hussein. You can see very elegant, very beautiful. A treasury of sacred maxims. Now, I really recommend those who are pursuing knowledge in Islam and those who just want a better understanding of how certain rules are, for example, concluded, and the rationale behind it. You know, I introduced, for example, to many people in one of the longest videos I've posted in the last couple of weeks, the concept of taghallub. And a number of people have contacted me saying, how is this Islamic? It goes against principles in Islam that are outlined in the Quran and Sunnah, not realizing that, you know, these principles are developed later on very valid foundations. So those foundations are covered here in this very brief, beautiful, and really rich compendium of sacred treasuries. So maxims. So here we see by Cube Publishing, and dedication there. So here, let's look at the contents page. So we have already some really wonderful principles that are applied, again, in the Sunni school of thought. I really have to emphasize that. Principles that are actually extracted from the authentic and primary sources, the Quran and the Sunnah. So the scholars of fiqh don't just invent principles, they extract them and then codify them. That extraction process is known as al-istinbat. The word yastanbitu, or the verb, is actually is mentioned in Surah At-Tawbah. In the last couple of verses, is mentioned in Surah At-Tawbah, liyastanbitu, to extract. So the process by which scholars extract principles in Islam is known as istinbat, and they utilize the Quran and the Sunnah. And the reason why I mention that is because it's very important to understand they don't invent rules just out of nowhere. So these rules come from the foundations, the principles of Islam, the principal sources, the Quran and the Sunnah and Ijma' Sahaba. But because of the need of development and new situations that come into Islamic history, they have had to codify certain rules. So here we have the foundation of many of these codified rules. So for example, the first maxim is, the actions are according to their ultimate ends. So the reason why I want to share this is because I don't want to leave people in limbo, confused or frustrated. I want you to understand there are sources for these sorts of principles, and we want to actually dive into this ocean of knowledge, wonderful ocean of knowledge. And this is pragmatism, actually. They are responding to real life events that took place following the first generation of Islam, and they're actually codifying solutions for following generations that come after them to be able to fix those problems. So we want to be people who are connected to the past, but also entrenched in current day situations with the tools with which we can interpret and also overcome obstacles. So these are the principles they give us by which we can apply in the current day. Then we have إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, of course, the second maxim, or the al-jazā'u min jins al-amal. Al-jazā'u min jins al-amal in Arabic. So the second maxim is the reward for an action is according to the origin of the intention, what you intended. Al-jazā'u min jins al-amal. Okay, and then other maxims here. So let's look at some of those that are a bit more practical and relevant. So intent takes precedence over words. Maxim number 5. Intent takes precedence over words. So when we're looking at the historical context, certain statements that were made, you can take the face value, the literal interpretation, or at the scholarly level, you look at the intent behind what was said. So the words are not necessarily the most primary factor, it's the ma'ana, al-ma'ani. So for example, those who scrutinize a hadith or historical accounts, there are two camps. There are those who look at just the words conveyed and take it at face value. And there are those who look at the intent behind the words. What was intended? Al-ma'ani, the intentions. Entire books are written based on al-ma'ani. So for example, the hadith, the meanings of the hadith, not just the words, the meanings. In this we find that the scholars of fiqh take the intention over the words. Now imagine what that would mean for your understanding of hadith and history. If you began to look for the intentions behind the words rather than just the words that were stated. It's fascinating stuff, really just amazing, insightful. This is why scholars are the inheritors of the prophets. They have a far deeper understanding of these texts than we have. You know, the average Joe who just reads the hadith face value and takes it and begins to argue based on that. They go far beyond that. So they have these tools with which to analyze, evaluate, study, and really delve into the knowledge. So the intentions take precedence over the words spoken, and you can go on for ages discussing this fifth maxim alone. Then we have maxim number 6. The explicit, al-dhahir, has primacy over the implicit, al-batin. So that which is visible, that which can be seen, is prioritized in the scale of evidence over that which is not seen. So for example, again, to make it very relevant, the recent revolution or the recent liberation in Syria, there were visible, apparent elements, and there were those elements that were not visible, they were implicit. So when we analyze a situation that's unfolding in real world, in the real time, we don't prioritize the hidden intentions. We don't say husnul dhan, let's just hope something's happening back end. We take what's actually visible. That's the principle we have here. We take what is presented to us, of course critically, but we don't subdue what is visible, what is known, and prefer what is hidden, hoping that somehow there is a better motive behind certain actions. Okay, so this is again a principle here. We take the evidence presented to us, and if there is a counter evidence that somebody else has that is currently not visible, it is upon them to present that information to us. Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu says, following the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's departure, when the Prophet was amongst us, we used to receive revelation, and these revelations would clarify to us hidden things, hidden meanings, hidden intentions. And so we could rely on revelation to clarify matters to us. Now that we no longer have revelation, it is upon every individual to clarify matters for themselves, because we can only judge what we can see. So if you have an intention, which is a good intention, do not wait for people to figure it out for themselves. You must present clarification so that people are not left in the gray, effectively. So the principle here is, we judge what is apparent, not what is intended. It's a wonderful principle. It's a very pragmatic, very realistic principle here. And then, of course, want to give preference to others, intentions. And maxim number 9, a principle that I think many of us overlook or don't even know about. It is the principle of removing harm. If you have a situation where there is a benefit and a harm, which takes precedence? According to the scholarly class, you remove harm. So I'll give you an example. Let us say you have an adversarial party who doesn't like Islam, and you have an option to give that person da'wah hoping that they become Muslim, or you have the option of clarifying issues where they have misunderstanding, so that they don't become Muslim, but they can understand and have a good understanding as to why you're doing what you're doing. So, for example, you may have a neighbor, who hates the fact that women have to wear hijab. They consider it oppressive, disrespectful, just unpleasant. You have two options. One option could be, I'm going to prioritize giving them da'wah so they can become Muslim. When they become Muslim, they'll appreciate hijab and everything will be fine. The other perspective could be, they may never become Muslim, that's okay, but I can explain or I could demonstrate to them why, from a cultural perspective, a practical perspective, the hijab is worn. So my intention there is not to make them Muslim, but to explain and clarify and remove any doubt they may have, so that they can understand and appreciate, if not tolerate, the fact that, okay, fine, this is a cultural preference, and that you clarify, so that you don't leave people in a position of ignorance and darkness. So here, when we have to prioritize, we don't prioritize converting people to Islam, we prioritize warding harm away. So how do we do that? We clarify things for people. So at the societal level, rather than seeking to convert as many people as possible to Islam, if we live in non-Muslim societies, the scholarly, the educated approach is to clarify things, to ward evil away. If they become Muslim, alhamdulillah, in the process. But the priority we have is to make sure that any misunderstanding, any misconceptions are removed and expelled, so we can lift away the veil of ignorance. Now, if people are content with that, that's okay. If they can become Muslim, even better. But our priority is to first and foremost remove doubts and confusion. And that involves speaking to people intelligently, considerably, and also being intelligent in how you communicate with people in the wider society. It's very important. The priority is to remove harm before bringing benefit. And you could apply that to the military situation, for example, economic situation, many principles, many situations where you could weigh out the harms and the goods. The priority is always to remove the harm, first and foremost, and then to bring the good. Yeah, so you can see how useful these principles are. And once we begin to delve into these scholarly foundational principles, many situations that we are witnessing become clearer for us, where we should put our efforts and focus. So there are many more maxims. I'm going to pick a few more here. Let's look at another one. So Maxim 15 says, considerations in the removal of harm. This is quite a controversial one, because here it's a balance of what's the greater harm. It's a matter of picking the least of the greater harms. It's very controversial, but again, this is what makes books such as these very essential for us. It gives us nuance and perspective. It's not ever black and white in most cases. There is a lot of nuanced perspective needed. Again, when we look at it from the scholarly eye, things are very different. So again, a situation, for example, of revolutions, of coups, what's the lesser of the greater harms? You see? And Maxim 15 will tell you, well, if in removing a great harm, you end up with a greater harm, don't remove that small harm, because what results from that is a greater disadvantage for society. So the scholars would say, be patient. Okay? That's an example from a maxim that's written here, Maxim 15. So let's look. Maxim 21, another interesting one. Urf, custom, urf, is a legal proof. So in certain situations, we have something known as al-hukm al-'ada, or urfi evidence. So customary practices in certain lands and societies can be used as legal codes. You can judge by a custom in a certain land. Again, this is very controversial for those who are not learned in these sciences, but it is very useful and very important. So you would hear, for example, people who would accuse societies or governments of ruling by man-made laws, not realizing that certain man-made laws are perfectly acceptable in Islam. Not only that, but the customary actions of a people become law. So, for example, under the Ottomans, you have what we know as the Qanuni law. The Qanuni law, okay? So, I mean, there are many things we could go on for a long time, but the point being, when you start reading and exploring and learning from the well of knowledge that is open to the scholars, things look very different, okay? Very different. So, again, the customs can become legal proof. And in Maxim 22, similarly, the custom can also prohibit something. Okay, so customary practices can also be utilized to prohibit actions. Right? So this is where Muslims may have a problem understanding the difference between culture, which is good, and culture, which is prohibitive, that goes against Islam. So customs and culture is not necessarily anti-Islam automatically, as some of us may like to conceive of. Is either Islam or culture? No. In most of the cases, Islam and culture. Islam and culture. Al-ma'ruf, which Allah mentions many times in the Quran, is culture, a customary practice. Again, we've lost a lot of this grounding. So custom has priority over literal meaning. So really some interesting principles here. I mean, there are so many, I don't want to get into too many of them. But you can see here, really interesting, okay? Again, Maxim 31, literal meaning takes precedence, the presumption of continuity, just amazing stuff. Amazing, amazing, amazing stuff. So here you can see here that this is a wonderful book for those who really want to begin on this journey. And it is really just captures all the essence of what the juristic toolbox would be for analyzing situations. And you can see here the 5 core maxims and their moral philosophy. Okay? So acts are judged by their goal and purpose. Harm is to be removed. This is very, very important. I think many of the youngsters especially do not understand this principle. The removing of harm is a priority before the bringing of benefit for society. Once you understand this one, a lot of things make a lot of sense. Customary usage is the determining factor, how things are. So this way, for example, in the Maliki school of thought, the Sunnah and the Hadith are very different. The custom is more important than the Hadith. So here the customary usage is the determining factor. It's far more than just reading books and citing Hadith. There's a lot more to it. What really makes something, you could say, solidified is how that thing is implemented and the customary usage of that thing. Very important. We have the Sunnah versus Hadith dichotomy there. Certainty is not overruled by doubt. Al-shakku la yazul al-haq. Al-haqqu la yazul al-shaq. That the truth or something that is clear cannot be undermined by something that is less than clear. Okay? So something that is very clear or something that appears to be very clear cannot be undermined because of something that could be clear or something that is less than clear. So this is again another problem we have in many of our circles, where we overlook the evidence and apparent and we prioritize what should be, what we wish would be. So the husn dhan argument. Here we cannot do that. We don't receive revelation anymore. So we must go by what is evidence and clear, and then we could hope for something to be clarified later on. But until we have that additional clarity, we must prioritize what is evident and before us. And then hardship begets ease. So wonderful stuff. Let's look a bit more into this. So here we have the structure of this book. What I really love about this book, again, it follows a very simple, a very clear, a very concise, but also a very systematic method in first giving you the actual maxim. So we'll take one example. It gives you the Arabic, so you can memorize it and learn it. So for example, just escaped my mind. I mentioned it earlier on. The reward is min jinsin amal. The reward is from the essence or the origin of the action. Al jaza'u min jinsin amal, for example. So that's one maxim. So it gives you the Arabic and the English. You can learn it, memorize it. Then it gives you the legal justification. Okay, the reason why this principle is, so the illah, or the reason, the legal rationale behind it, so you can understand. And then the moral philosophy, very important. Why is it that this is applied? So for example, why is it that at-taghallub, that if somebody muscles their way into power, we must submit to them, even though they got to that power in less than ideal situations, and in many cases, un-Islamic means. Why do we then submit to that authority? So the moral philosophy behind that would be in this situation to reduce the harm. Okay? So it gives you all three. The actual coinage, the maxim, then it gives you the legal underpinning or the rationale behind, and then it gives you the moral philosophy behind it. Yeah? So it's wonderful. And what this author has done is he's taken 40 maxims, which again, if you have the thirst and the ability, really try to memorize as many as you can. He has explained them so simply, so eloquently that it's very easy to understand. He's also gathered various schools in the Sunni school, from the Hanafi to the Maliki to the Shafi'i to the Hanbali, because these are principles that go across the schools. It's not just one school of thought, it's all 4 schools. It also gives you contemporary ulama, okay, and contemporary books. Wonderful, wonderful. So let's take one example. A good example here. So the first maxim, الأمور بمقاصدها. الأمور بمقاصدها. So the actions or the affairs are according to their ultimate objective. Al-maqasid al-shar'iyya. So here, this is a very, very grand, very lofty principle actually. That doesn't just look at the action or the decision at hand. It looks at the maqasid, the ultimate objective of this rule or this principle. And so you judge things not by their apparent, direct, immediate meaning, but the absolute objective behind that action. So for example, in the Amur Rimal, there was a year in which Medina was under famine. And at that time, Sayyidina Umar al-Faruq radiallahu anhu was the Khalifa. Now we know that under normal circumstances, theft is punished. Beyond a certain limit, it is punished. During that year of famine, theft increased because many people found themselves in abject poverty, and they had no means of purchasing items, and they were starving. So some people began to steal just to sustain their life. They began to steal. So in that year, Sayyidina Umar, he suspended the had punishment. He suspended what used to be a punishment applied to theft cases. He suspended it because of this principle, in that the reason why people were punished is because they were doing something that was not necessarily, it wasn't a necessity, and they were harming society. But in that year, because of what was evident, people had obviously many alternatives in certain cases, but many people were driven to desperation to steal to save their lives. He realized that applying the rule would not be according to the maqasid of Sharia. And so he suspended that rule for 1 year until the situation changed. Okay, so that was using the absolute objective, the maqasid. And in that case, he changed the ruling. And there are many other situations where the scholars or the rulers at the time had to change certain rulings temporarily because the ultimate objective was not, wasn't congruent with what was being done in that time. So again, that's one example. There are many others, but it's a wonderful book. I would recommend it really for those who want a greater understanding of the you could say the logic or the rationale, the principles behind certain rulings scholars have made in history. And again, it's a very concise book. He has compiled a very concise, very informative, very elegant collection of 40 maxims. And again, I would recommend highly for those who want to understand certain rulings and to reconcile what they are being told by scholars and what they read for themselves in the Quran and Sunnah that appears to be contradictory. These are the sorts of maxims that would help you understand the rationale behind. Also the historical development, because there is a historical trajectory that people don't understand. They believe everything is just fixed, in a state of fixed reality, but it's also a flux. So here we have intent over words, wonderful stuff. I mean, this changes how you perceive many ahadith. Many things are changed when you consider these very basic principles. That you may hear a hadith with certain wording, commands or prohibitions, but the intention behind that statement has to also be taken into consideration. That will be very important when looking at situations that unfold in the real world. Okay, the intention as to why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Do not do this" or "do this." The intention takes precedence over what he said in that situation, because it's the rationale behind it, the illah. That's what really at the heart of the matter is. Why was that command given? Why was a prohibition given? So we go far beyond just the general expression, the am. We look at we go beyond the what is specific, al-khas, and we go to the general, yeah, the am, the general, like you could almost say the universal. So from the specific to the universal, yeah, very wonderful stuff. So again, I've gone on for too long, but this is the book, A Treasury of Sacred Maxims by Shahrul Hussain, Cube Publishing. It's a wonderful book. I'll recommend it for everyone. Barakallahu feekum wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.